Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be discussing the newspaper for today, that is 15th March 2023, and we shall be taking up the discussion for a few of the important articles which have appeared in the Hindu newspaper, and that is for the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. We shall be picking up the articles and we shall be holding the discussion for these important articles one by one. Now, after the discussion, I suggest and I recommend and in fact advise to you to go to our Telegram channel and take up the quiz with regards to the multiple choice questions which can be framed from these particular topics, and that shall augur well and bode well for your preparation for your prelims perspective. The link for the Telegram channel will be given in the description below. Having said that, let us quickly take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. So basically, today we are going to hold a discussion for 4 topics in an elaborate manner from the mains and the prelims perspective, and 2 of those topics shall be primarily for the prelims perspective. So we shall be initiating the discussion with the topics which have appeared in the editorial, that is Saudi-Iranian normalisation, the ties that have normalized slightly because of the Chinese brokered deal, and this is something which has appeared in page 6. That is the editorial page of the Hindu edition for Delhi. And here, this is going to be relevant, significantly important for your paper 2. Okay? So this is going to be very, very important for your paper 2. Now, this is a kind of an evolution of the story that you would have been following for the past week, where China has been brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia as well as Iran. Now, the second topic that we are going to discuss is a case for a better electricity public hearing. There we shall be discussing about what is this aspect of public hearing in terms of electricity, and why is it important for us to understand a broader stakeholder consultation mechanism in order to reach at a proper conclusion with regards to how to fix your tariffs, and also a kind of a transparency which is required in the electricity distribution system. Here we shall also be taking a look at the distribution companies and why is it that they incur so huge amount of losses. Then after that, we are going to discuss what are India's immediate growth prospects. That is again going to be relevant for your paper 3, that is economy portion. And this basically throws some light and some information with regards to the economic growth story of India and how is it that India has managed to recover from the conditions of COVID pandemic. Because the second advanced estimates have been released by NSO, and that gives us an idea about what has happened during the COVID time and what is it that lies in front of us in store. Then, why do landfills catch fire during summers? This is again going to be very important for your paper 3. That is the portion of environment. Okay. Now, this is again a follow-up to the story with regards to recent occurrence of fire in the landfill sites near Kochi, which basically had turned the entire area of Kochi into a gas chamber. So here we are going to analyze that why is it that the landfills across the country, they end up catching fire quite frequently, and given the fact that summer is upon us, there can be more frequent fire incidents which can lie in front of us. So what is it that we should do, or what is it that we can take as a precautionary step moving ahead into the future? Then a couple of topics from the prelims perspective with regards to Australia's decision to buy US nuclear submarines, that is the stealth nuclear submarines under AUKUS. We are going to talk about AUKUS very slightly in a brief manner, and then Indigenous very short-range missile systems that have been tested. So what are these systems and why they are significantly relevant in providing a kind of a missile shield for our defense installations, for our cities, and so on. Now, having said that, without any further ado, let us initiate the discussion for the first topic, and that is something which has appeared in page 6 again for the Delhi edition. And this is going to be relevant for your paper 2, that is IR. Now, you would have observed that for the past week, there has been a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about Saudi and Iranian ties getting normalized. For those of us who are unaware, we have to understand that Saudi Arabia and Iran, these are two of the major powers in the Middle Eastern region, and these are not friends, to refer to it very politely. They have been at each other's throats for decades now. And basically they have indulged in proxy wars against each other with the help of various other groups and militias, which has ravaged the entire region and which has caused enough amount of ruckus in the entire area. Earlier, you had the scenario where United States used to be the power broker in that region, and all these countries used to go to United States and the doorsteps of United States in order to find a kind of a relevant solution. But with United States backtracking itself from the global scenario, China has stepped up, and China has brokered this deal. And in fact, the Chinese minister Wang Yi was very instrumental in brokering this deal, and this is something which has been China's policy for some time now. In fact, the article also talks about that how for the past year and a half itself, various different Chinese scholars and research thinkers and think tanks have been talking about a political level involvement of China in the Middle Eastern region. You have to understand that till now, China has been interfering and China has been getting into the relations with various different countries, but that has been largely on an economical as well as a diplomatic level. This is one of the first instances where China has managed to broker a political peace and a political agreement, so to say. So the article basically is headlined with the fact that Saudi-Iranian normalization challenges in West Asia. Now, if I give you a brief context and background of this particular article, that is basically on 10th of March 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran, represented by their national security advisors, signed an agreement in Beijing to re-establish diplomatic ties. Re-establishment of diplomatic ties in itself is a major decision, because you have to again look back at history where these two countries, they did not look at each other eye to eye. And in fact, they would devolve almost significant amount of their defense budget in harming each other and each other's interests. And that would involve triggering proxy wars, maybe in Yemen, maybe in Syria, or arming the militia groups which would launch sporadic missile attacks and rocket attacks at each other's oil depots. And also, this is significantly harmful, or this used to be significantly harmful for the energy security of the entire world. How? Because both Saudi Arabia and Iran, they are oil-rich nations. When they indulge in a kind of a diplomatic tussle or a kind of a ruckus which is created in that region, so automatically the supply chain routes, they get disrupted. And when the supply chain routes get disrupted, immediately the shock is felt in the oil prices. The oil prices go up. And with the rise of the oil prices, in general, the commodity pricing across the globe, that is something which suffers an inflationary trend. And that is never good for developing nations such as India and other nations in the region, for example, even China for that matter. China's economy is slowing down, and thereby China requires the materials to be available to it at a cheaper price. So that is why China has finally managed to broker this deal. So this deal talks about respecting each other's sovereignty and maintaining non-interference in each other's domestic affairs, which was not the case till recent past. Now both these countries, that is Saudi Arabia as well as Iran, both these countries, they represent, or they are basically dominated by various different ethnic groups, that is the Shias and the Sunnis, right? Saudi Arabia is majorly a Sunni-dominated country, whereas Iran has been a Shia-dominated country. And that is where there has been a consistent tussle with regards to identity politics as well, which has played out in the region. And when I say proxy wars mean what? They do not launch attack directly, so that there is a kind of a plausible deniability in place, that we are not launching an attack directly on your soil, but maybe via a third party we will try to install in the other countries in the region surrounding your country, we will try to install a particular government representing a certain ethnic majority. And that is something which has disturbed these countries for a very long time. And basically, this agreement reinstates two previous accords that these countries had arrived at. One accord which was signed way back in around 1998, that is something around dealing with economic, technical, scientific and cultural ties. Because the cultural ties between these two countries, they go back ages. It is not as if this is something new which has been created for a couple of decades or in the last century. This goes back for a long period of time. And that is why it is very, very important for these countries to re-establish these peace ties. And also, the agreement ends 7 years of diplomatic estrangement between the two Gulf neighbors, where they had called back their ambassadors and there was no communication, official lines of communication which would exist. Now, as I told you, there has been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate in the international community with regards to what to do with these two countries. Be it the area of Yemen surrounding the region of Saudi Arabia. There it is said that the Iranian role in installing the militias in Yemen had been very significant. And thereby they would cause some amount of disturbance in Saudi Arabia as well. Then another front came into existence in the form of Syria. There again, both these conflicting forces, they installed their proxies, and in fact, with the help of their proxies, they continued a civil war. While Iran and Saudi Arabia are not directly influenced by the civil war, but wherever the civil war takes place, that country is completely ravaged. And that is where it gives rise to illegal arms trade, drug trafficking, human migration, and all the lot of humanitarian issues that you can even think about. Now, as I told you, that United States has been at the forefront for a long period of time in this region. And United States has been the net security provider in this region. The Fifth Fleet of the United States Navy has got a base in that region around Bahrain, and thereby the entire fleet used to be deployed in that region, and that fleet used to be significantly powerful enough to be able to stop or to be able to exert its influence in any of these areas as it wants. But since the presidency of Donald Trump himself, United States has started taking a backseat in international affairs. United States is becoming more of a closed political system where it is looking inwards. As has been the trend in the rest of the world, that is something which is present in United States as well. Now, here we have to understand that this agreement marks a significant tectonic shift in the global geopolitics, whereby the hegemony of United States is being replaced by Chinese influence. Now, why is it that the hegemony of United States is being challenged? Not only is it being challenged, but it is also being replaced. So first of all, a withdrawal of US as being the net security provider in the region, that is very apparent. That has been very apparent for some time now. And signs and signals for this have been coming in front of us for the past 3 to 4 years now. In fact, it was very well documented, and it was very famous at that point of time when President Biden made a visit, and thereby he was given a kind of a normal welcome, which doesn't augur well for a president of United States. In fact, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, he himself talked about diversifying his relations and diversifying the options for Saudi Arabia with other countries such as China, Russia, and so on, putting at risk the interests of US-backed forces. Now, military failures leading to a loss of credibility for United States. Now, you also have to keep in mind that if, let's suppose, I start acting as the net security provider in a particular society. I come to your society and I say that in your society, if there is any issue, I will be the one who will take care of it. But then I will need to have some credibility of my own, isn't it? That will I be able to provide that security? Do I have enough firepower available with me to be able to provide that security to you? Now that credibility for United States has been dented. How? So in the past decade and a half, United States has launched significant military advancements and significant military incursions, so to say, in the regions of Afghanistan and Iraq. And both of them did not end well. Did not end well for those regions, did not end well for United States, did not augur well for the reputation that United States holds so dear to it. Now, once that credibility is dented, immediately the respect level for that net security provider will also automatically decrease. And there comes the scope for an outside power to come in and replace United States. Then, domestic politics becoming more polarizing in the US. Now, if you are not aware, then if the political system in United States right now is deeply polarized, just like what we see in the political scenarios across the globe. Either you are completely in one side or completely against one side. There is no middle ground. So just like that in United States, you have the Democrats as well as the Republicans. Presently, President Biden represents the Democrats, and Donald Trump represented the Republicans. Now, Republicans, they have a very strong opinion and a particularly prejudiced opinion with regards to countries such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, and so on. Now, when Donald Trump came into power and when the Republicans got their say, thereby many of the treaties that were arrived at after taking the global consensus, all those treaties were put at risk. So that is again where these countries, they have decided not to put all their interests into the basket of United States once again, because they don't know, and you never know what might happen in the future. Because already there are murmurs going around in the region of United States that come 2024, there are chances that Republicans might come back to power, and they have made it very clear that once we come back to power, we will impose very, very harsh sanctions in the region of Iran. So that is why these countries are automatically exploring safe alternatives and safe harbors. Then, China is an attractive partner for the region. Now, this again is something which has been developing for the past decade almost, where China has basically inked deals with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and all the countries in the region with regards to energy security. Because China, just like India, requires a lot of its energy to be imported, energy sources rather, such as fuel, crude oil, natural gas, and so on. So that is where these countries have been a significant supplier for China, and China has basically given them billions of dollars in terms of trade deals. So for these countries, China is a very attractive option. And for these countries, it is much easier to please China and much more important to please China nowadays, because China is a rising power. And in the mindset of many of the countries in the region, United States is already a power which is on the decline. Then, the region is important for China's Belt and Road Initiative as well. Now, China, we all know, has launched the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, this Belt and Road Initiative, which has been a flagship scheme or a flagship program led by Premier Xi Jinping, now that Belt and Road Initiative is already at risk, already in danger, because of the economic woes of the countries through which it is passing through. All the various countries which were supposed to be a part of that Belt and Road Initiative, they are already facing huge amount of economic losses, economic debts in front of them. And for them, survivability and economic viability is becoming difficult with the passage of each day. So that is where China needs this Belt and Road Initiative to be successful. And for that, these two important countries of the region, they are particularly significant. Now, once this agreement has been reached, once this deal has been arrived at, then what? There are still challenges which lie in front of these countries. Because please understand, just because China has brokered a deal right now does not mean they have forgotten all their animosity that they have harbored for so many years, and now they are the closest of the friends. No. There is still a deep-rooted discontent which does exist, and a kind of a resentment of sorts which does exist in between these two countries. In fact, Iranian National Guards, also referred to as the Iranian Revolutionary National Guards, they have got separate significant units which are targeting the regions of Saudi Arabia in specialty. So that is something which needs to be ironed out as well. So differences are very, very deep rooted. So there needs to be much greater level of engagement, not only at the level of the government, at the level of the diplomats, at the level of the trading community, at the level of the business, at the level of people to people connect as well. And these differences, which are particularly capitalized by the ones who capitalize on the differences in terms of the ethnic minority and majority, those differences need to be waved off. Then, proxy wars in Syria and Yemen has further divided the region, as we have talked about, with various different nations hedging their bets that we should take the side of Saudi Arabia, we should take the side of Iran in this, and that is where there is a significant amount of bipartisan, or rather a kind of a Cold War kind of a situation which does exist in between these two countries. It is just like the era where United States and Russia used to be consistently hammering at each other. Something very similar has emerged in the entire region of Middle East and West Asia. Now, regional security also needs a revival of the nuclear agreement. Which nuclear agreement? The nuclear agreement which was initially brokered under the presidency of Barack Obama, when Barack Obama was the president of United States, with significant amount of global consensus, bringing major countries on the table. They had agreed on a nuclear agreement whereby Iran agreed that it will not carry out the enrichment of nuclear uranium, so that nuclear weapons wouldn't be made by Iran. Having said that, immediately after Iran signed this deal, Donald Trump came into power, and regardless of all the sanctions or regardless of all the various restrictions that Iran agreed to impose on itself, nonetheless, United States imposed deliberating sanctions, economic sanctions on Iran, which significantly hampered Iranian interest. So that is where there have been recent signals which indicate that Iran has again reinstated the nuclear enrichment program in order to make weapons-grade uranium, which can be utilized for manufacturing of nuclear weapons and increasing Iran's nuclear stockpile. Now, this joint comprehensive plan of action, that is basically again going to be relevant for your prelims examination with regards to what it is. Okay, so it is a kind of an agreement reached by various different nations and Iran, whereby Iran has agreed not to enrich the uranium beyond the weapons grade and to use uranium only for energy and peaceful purposes and energy generation in general, right? So there is also a management which is required to manage the aggressive nature of Israel in the region. And all these nations, they are particularly hostile in terms of how they deal with Israel. And Israel also does not leave any stone unturned in order to poke these nations on the International Committee of Nations as well, whenever it gets an opportunity. So that also needs to be tamed, and that also needs to be brought under control. Now, all this discussion that we are having, the crux of it is what lies for India going forward. So importance for India when it comes to this deal. So here, the region is vital for India's energy security. We all know that India also gets significant amount of its oil supply from this particular area. In fact, till recently, India used to be heavily dependent on Iran for fertilizer supply as well. Fertilizer supply such as urea. And we all know that in a country like India, where more than 50% of the population is involved directly or indirectly in agriculture, the supply of fertilizers is vitally important. So thereby, in order to maintain the supply lines, in order to ensure that there is no disruption which takes place, there needs to be a lasting peace in the region. And that is why it is relevant for India, and India becomes a stakeholder. Then, large number of Indian nationals reside in these areas, in these regions. They move out and they start working in these areas as employees in various different companies, and they send back huge amount of remittances as well. So not only for the welfare of the Indian nationals who have settled there, but also in order to ensure that more remittances come to India, in order to bring about a favorable current account numbers. That is where, again, a lasting peace is important. Whenever the Gulf countries or the Gulf nations or the Middle Eastern nations, whenever they have indulged in a kind of a conflict scenario, if you observe the economic outcome of that point, immediately the remittances which are received by India, that has dipped quite significantly. Presently, in the era where our remittances or the money that we receive from abroad, our nationals settled in abroad, so basically those remittances have reached a figure close to around $100 billion. So that is very, very significant. And that is something which cannot be put at stake. But the major problem which arises out of it for India is now India will have to deal with China when it is dealing with these countries as well, because obviously China will have a very important stake, and it is no secret with regards to how our relations with China that is faring out to be. So that is where there is a need for a much closer cooperation with China in order to have a lasting relationship and a lasting fruitful outcome from this region. So that is what is relevant for you from this topic, and from here you can easily expect a mains type of question to be framed as well. So in this topic, we have talked about what this deal is, what this agreement is, brokered by whom, why is it that United States is being replaced, what are the challenges which lie ahead in front of us, and also why it is important for India. Okay? Now, then, another one, a case for better electricity public hearing. This is again something which has appeared in page 6 of the Delhi edition. Now, this is about electricity public hearing. Now, what is it about? So basically, you have to understand that when we talk about electrical supply, there are various different stakeholders which are involved. And those stakeholders, be it the transmission companies, the generation companies, the distribution companies, all of them need to be performing perfectly well in order for the entire system to perform flawlessly, smoothly, and also so that we are able to get electricity at a cheaper rate with a better quality as well. So the context of the background of this article is that the scale of operations of electricity distribution companies is clear from the fact that the annual revenue requirement is close to around 20% of the union budget. Now, it is crucial that the citizen's voice or the voice of the normal citizen and the general public is heard, is incorporated before taking any decision with regards to fixing of the power tariffs, with regards to what should be the quality of power supply, for how long that power supply needs to be, where is it that power supply needs to be provided, at what tariffs. So for all this, there needs to be a significant amount of transparency involved. So basically, the electricity regulatory commissions, they provide a platform for the citizens to be able to voice their opinion, for the citizens to be able to hear as well the side of the distribution companies, that why are they increasing the tariffs if they are in a particular area. Now, before moving into few more intricacies of the topic, a basic information for you guys with regards to when we talk about distribution companies or discoms, as you will read a lot about in your entire preparation period, that distribution companies, they are incurring huge losses. So what are these distribution companies and what do we mean by power distribution? So in the entire aspect of power generation, you have to understand that there are three phases involved. One is generation of power. That is done with the various different power plants involved. Maybe you have the thermal power plant, nuclear power plant, hydroelectric power plant, solar power plant. These are generators. They will generate electricity. Then from these generation points, electricity is carried for far away distances, and thereby it is carried to areas which are many, many hundred kilometers away, and that is basically done with the help of the high voltage power lines, the transmission lines that you observe. So you will have the transmission substations which are involved. That is where the transmission comes into play. And after that comes the role of distribution. So it is this distribution which provides power to our houses, your house, my house, the individual shops that you see, the agricultural supply, the industrial supply, all of that is managed by these distribution companies. Now, all these distribution companies, in brief or in short, they are also referred to as DISCOMs. Now, almost all the DISCOMs across the country, they are incurring huge and heavy losses. And those losses, they are increasing day by day in almost all the regions. And the reason is very simple. They are incurring a loss because they are not generating enough revenue. Now, why are they not able to generate enough revenue? Again, the reason is very simple. So, if you take a look about the reason for losses, this is again important for your mains because this has been asked in the mains examination earlier as well, that why is it that DISCOMs suffer so significant amount of losses? So here, if you will take a look at it, first of all is faulty networks of power lines. Then after that, this faulty network of power lines, after that, if you will take a look at it, there is also the aspect where people, they steal that power, they illegally use that power without installing the meters, without paying the bill. Then after that, there is also significant amount of losses which are faced in terms of providing the power at an ultra cheap rate or maybe even free to majority of the users, majority of the common public. So if I am providing power to you at a very, very cheap rate and I am incurring more cost for that power, won't I be in losses? Absolutely yes. So that is again another reason. Now because of that, because the power companies have to provide power to the normal citizens at a very ultra cheap rate or maybe even free in many parts of the country and in many sectors, because of that there is a cross subsidization which happens. Now what is this cross subsidization? Cross subsidy simply. What is this? This is basically, suppose here you have the residential consumers, as you can see. You can also have here, let's say, industries, right? Now, if I am providing this power at a very cheap rate to the residential consumers, I need to recover some money from somewhere. So that is why the industries, they are supplied with the power which is at a much higher rate than average and than normal. And that is where the industries also suffer from losses, due to which many of the industries, they don't rely from these distribution companies for the availability of power. As a result of which there is a loss of revenue for these distribution companies. Now here we have written amongst one of the factors that there is a faulty network of power lines. Many of the power lines which have been installed, they are very, very old and in a dilapidated condition where there are frequent outages because of short circuit which happens and so on. But how is it that a distribution company is supposed to replace those power lines with a better network if they don't have revenue? So how will they get revenue? By charging the fair amount to the citizens. And we citizens also have to realize that if we want quality power and also 24-hour supply of power, we need to pay some amount of money for that. Otherwise, the industries are the ones which will suffer from losses, and also the government in all the areas are suffering from huge losses, because it is eventually the government which fills up the gap for these power distribution companies as well. Now, here, when we talk about it, so the hearings which are being conducted, what are these hearings? So the hearings are conducted or are held by the regulatory commissions. The regulatory commissions basically which have been present in the central portion as well as in the state level, at the central level as well as at the state level. So what these regulatory hearings they do is, the regulatory committees, when they carry out the public hearing, they facilitate interactions and cross-learning between the various different sectors, between the various different stakeholders which are involved. And hereby, they enable collective action also. There is a greater scrutiny on power tariffs, power purchase agreements, quality of power provided to the consumers as well. Now, many state ERCs, including those of Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh, for example, they have tried to increase access and diversify the participation by organizing tariff revision public hearings. What is the meaning of tariff revision public hearings? The meaning is very simple. Suppose I am a distribution company, I want to increase the power tariff. Rather than simply issuing a notice that from tomorrow power will be available at a higher price, I will simply say that let us all sit down together and let us hear out each other that what should be the relevant price which needs to be fixed, so that a multi-stakeholder agreement is reached and thereby a peace scenario is maintained. Now, even states such as Odisha, they have also taken a lead in this area by organizing these public hearings in local languages as well and in vernacular area languages as well, so that there is a mass participation which can happen. But then, during the time of the COVID pandemic, when everything went online, from court hearings to everything, quasi-judicial bodies, everything went online, these hearings, they were also taken online. Now, there were certain challenges which were exposed as well as certain opportunities which came to the fore. In terms of the challenges, you have to understand that not everybody has got the internet connection or the technical know-how in order to carry out an online hearing. So that is where there is a lack of accessibility based upon the digital divide and digital inequality which is prevalent. But at the same time, there are opportunities as well. So, online hearings versus in-person hearings, that is something you have to consider. So basically, in the case of the online hearing, what are the challenges? The lack of technical know-how. And we also cannot ignore there is a huge digital divide or digital inequality which is prevalent, in the sense that those of them who do not have the access to these digital medium, they will never be able to voice their opinions, or even those who are not very comfortable on the online media, they will never be comfortable in sharing what their problems or grievances are. But there is an opportunity as well. Whenever you conduct an online hearing, the participation of a larger mass can be ensured, because people, wherever they are sitting, they can directly participate. For example, let us take the state of Karnataka for an example. Now, if, let's suppose, the Electricity Regulatory Commission in Karnataka decides to hold a hearing for all these power tariffs and these issues in, let's say, the capital city of Bangalore. Now, imagine someone living in coastal Karnataka, how difficult it would be for them, or how inconvenient it would be for them to travel all the way to the region of Bangalore in order to get themselves heard. It would be almost impossible. Many of them won't even participate. But if you give them the option that you can join online, that is something which will be helpful for them. But then, what about those who don't have the access to digital medium? Well, they can very well attend the in-person or the physical hearing process. So, there is challenges for in-person hearing as well, but there are opportunities. So, opportunity in terms of online hearing, here you have to talk about larger mass participation. Okay? Right? Now, in the case of in-person hearing, much easier for people to bring their grievances on the table. One-on-one connect is always something which is more satisfactory, more beneficial. But there are issues with regards to transportation, logistical challenges, due to which many of the times in these hearings people don't even turn up. So what is the solution? What is it that we need to do going forward? Should it be something where these committees and these hearings should not happen anymore? Or is it something where we should strictly take the route of in-person hearing or the online hearing only? that should not be the case. And the article also talks about this. The article tells you that basically way forward is going to be the hybrid model. And what do we mean by the hybrid model? So, hybrid model represents the best of both these worlds. So, that is where you will have both online hearing, as well as we will get an understanding with regards to in-person hearing as well. So, you will have online as well as in-person. So that you can have a scenario where whenever this hearing is conducted, those of them who can join online, fair enough, put your grievances. Those of them who cannot join online, who face difficulty, better reach these areas. And there has to be a kind of a decentralization with the help of the data centers that we have in various different areas. We can also establish a kind of a decentralized meeting. For example, again, I will take the example of the state of Karnataka. If suppose Karnataka is holding these hearings, not only in Bangalore, but maybe in all the district headquarters, simultaneous hearings and live streaming can be done, so that people, they will feel comfortable in coming to their districts. They might not be comfortable traveling all the way, but they might be comfortable bringing their grievances in public in their own district. So there needs to be a kind of a decentralization in this. Okay? And that is required, that is relevant for them to be able to reach a consensus. So in this article, what is it that we have seen? We have seen why is it that distribution companies are important? Why is it that distribution companies are incurring significant amount of losses? We have seen what are these hearings that we are talking about. Why is it that it is important for us to be able to express our grievances? What is the outcome of it? A greater transparency. And the online hearings, the in-person hearings, and what needs to be done going ahead. Now, then we come to the next article, which is based on economy, and that is what are India's immediate growth prospects. Now, this article again is very significantly a portion of your economy. This has again appeared in page 7 of the Delhi edition, very relevant for your paper 3. Now, in this article, if you try to read it, it is filled with a lot of data pointers, lot of intricacies which are present. So let us try to simplify it a bit. So rather than trying to look at each and every data pointer, we will try to analyze a larger picture here. We shall try to understand that what is the current scenario in terms of our Indian economy and what is it that we need to look out for going ahead into the future. So when we talk about India and India's growth prospects, we have to understand that our economy was slowing down pre-COVID pandemic. The growth rate was decreasing prior to COVID pandemic itself. But when the COVID pandemic struck us, it did strike very hard. In fact, in the first quarter of the COVID pandemic, Indian economy suffered a contraction by close to around 23%. That was huge. That was almost unprecedented in various different nations and various different competing economies. That was a huge number. Now, there were estimates with regards to the yearly slowdown of close to around -7%. But the second advanced estimates which have been released by NSO, they tell us an information or they give us an idea that the contraction was not as bad as we thought it was or it would be. The situation was slightly better. In fact, other than the mining sector, almost all the sectors of the economy, they did fairly well considering the global economic scenario at this time or at the time of this COVID pandemic. So here when we take a look at the context or the background of it, NSO on Feb basically released a set of new numbers pertaining to annual and quarterly national income for the year 2020-21, 21-22 and 22-23. Now this new data set provides an opportunity to make a final assessment of COVID's adverse impact on India's GDP growth. At that point of time, everyone thought basically this is like the end of the world for Indian economy because it was contracting so significantly. But the numbers, they suggest slightly otherwise. So there is a growth story that we need to look into. So what is that? So basically, as per NSO's second advance estimate, India suffered a contraction of minus 5.7% in 2020 and 21. Now, even this minus 5.7% appears to be quite monumental and quite humongous. But we had an estimate earlier that it would be minus 7.7%. But it is not so. So there is a significant relief. Also, the sectors which benefited during that time were manufacturing, construction, finance, fintech in general, retail, real estate. All of them, they benefited quite significantly. So all these sectors, they were doing well. So one of the sectors which contracted or which did not do well was that of a mining sector. Mining sector significantly observed a kind of a contraction and the size of it reduced. Then real GDP during COVID-19 year amounted to close to around 136 lakh crore, and the GDP since that point of time grew by 9.1% in the following year, followed by almost 7% in the year after that. And presently, the GDP is at around 159.7 lakh crore as compared to 136.9 lakh crore which was observed earlier. So in that entire period, if you take the average growth that India has witnessed or that India has experienced was close to around 3.2%. That was the average growth that India experienced. Now, 3.2%. For a large country, for a large economy like India, it is simply not sufficient enough. In fact, many of the economists have always opined that for a large country like India, where millions of people enter the workforce almost every year, right? Almost every year you have millions of people who graduate, who are on the lookout for jobs. We need a growth of close to around 7% plus in order to be able to generate enough jobs for them. So any amount of growth less than 6% does not bode well for our economy at this stage of time. In fact, during this period and the period that we are talking about, countries such as China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, all of them indicated a growth which was slightly better than India. But nonetheless, we can take some positives in the trends that these economic stories have indicated. For example, there has been the ICOR, which has always improved since the time of COVID pandemic. Now, what is this ICOR? ICOR, in simple terms, is basically incremental capital output ratio. What do we mean by that? Capital to output means, for example, what is the amount of capital that I need to put in an economy to achieve growth? Let's suppose I talk about any country like India. Now, for India to achieve a kind of a growth, it needs the influx of certain capital, certain amount of investment. Only after you carry out that investment, only after that you will observe that growth, isn't it? So here you have to understand that in a situation or in a good country, you need to, or in a performing economy rather, not in a good or a bad country, but in a performing economy, with slightest influx of money or capital input, immediately the growth accelerates or becomes exponential. But take the case of faltering economies. Faltering economies, for example, take the case of our neighborhood of Sri Lanka or Pakistan for that matter. In all these, if you want to achieve growth now, you will have to pump in a lot of money. Right? So that is something which is referred to as ICOR. So lesser the ICOR, better the economic scenario of that country is. Now, it is the relationship between the level of investment made in the economy and the subsequent and the consequent increase in GDP which is observed. So it is basically the capital invested divided by the output that you gain, right? So lower it is, better. How? For example, if I invest 100 rupees, let's suppose, right? And out of it, I get an output of only 20, or let's say only 10. Then my ICOR will be what? I have invested 100, I have got an output of 10. So my ICOR will be 10 in this case, isn't it? Now, on the other hand, suppose the economy is performing very well, and by investment of rupees 100, I get an output maybe of 25. So this is capital to output. So the output is 25. Earlier I was getting only an output of 10. Now I am getting an output of 25. So what will be my ICOR? ICOR will be 4. So this always gives an idea of healthy economy. Healthy economy. In many of the advanced economies, you will see that ICOR is close to around 2%, whereby if you invest 100, you get 50 as an output. That can happen when all the supply chains, the logistic network, the transportation links, the transportation network, all of them, if they are to the point and on point, that is where you will get a better benefit out of it. Okay? Now, here, the estimated ICOR was 8.5 in 2019-20, and that is something which has come down to around 4.9 in around 2022-23, which indicates what? Which indicates a scenario that now our economy is performing much better. Now, by investing little amount, we are getting greater amount of outcome or a greater amount of output as a result, which means economy is recovering. So in simple terms, try to understand this, that always lower the ICOR, better the economy. That is, in the sense it indicates that with little amount of capital, you can achieve greater growth. Higher ICOR means with greater amount of capital, you achieve little growth. But lower ICOR means with little capital, you achieve higher growth. So that is where the ICOR for our country, that has reduced, and that is something which is good for the economy, right? Improvement. Okay? That is the aspect of ICOR. Now, here, the gross fixed capital formation and private final consumption expenditure, which is also sometimes referred to as FCE or PFCE, that also has increased by 17% and around 13% respectively. So capital formation, that is the formation of capital goods and general asset creation, that has also improved incrementally. Then, before the COVID pandemic, we were suffering from a gross underutilization of our capacity. When I say underutilization of our capacity, what do we mean by that? Suppose as an individual, I have set up a factory. I have set up a factory which can manufacture 100 cars in a day, let's suppose. Now the demand is not for 100 cars. The demand is only for, let's say, 50 cars. So if I run my factory at 100% capacity, will that be justified? No, because what will I do with so many manufacturing cars? So that is why there was an underutilization even before the pandemic, where majority of our manufacturing sectors, they were running below their potential or below their 100% capacity. So capacity utilization, that is something which was not happening. If you have the capacity, if you have installed a factory and you are not using it 100%, that is capacity underutilization, means there is lack of demand in the economy. That has improved drastically. So basically, capacity utilization was around 70% in 2019-2020. That has increased almost by 3.5%. That means across all the sectors, all the various different factories, all the various different industries, they are utilizing much greater of their capacity. Now, if suppose an industry is now utilizing much greater of its capacity, what is the meaning of it? What is the implication of it? The implication is that now they are manufacturing more. That means they will be able to provide employment for more people. When more people will get employment, they will be able to earn more. So when they are able to earn more means what? They will go to the market, be able to spend significantly, and that is when slowly and steadily the economic revival is something which shall also be very, very apparent. So that is a major improvement which has happened in the economy. Now, there are still some challenges which prevail in front of us. Despite all the good news, despite all the good figures that we have talked about, there are significant amount of challenges that befall in front of us. For example, there has been a slowdown in global growth story, which means that globally the demand has reduced. As a result of that, when the global demand reduces, your products, they won't be in that demand in other countries, so your exports will also fall down. Throughout the 80s and the 1990s, 1980s, 1990s, the entire world was growing significantly. So that is when countries like China, they became export-oriented countries. They started manufacturing products which they could simply end up exporting. Now here, when that happens, automatically you start manufacturing more, you start exporting more, and obviously your economy rises up. But in this case, you would observe that because the global growth has slowed down, export is slowing down, that will have an adverse effect and impact on global economy in general. Then there is a greater geopolitical uncertainty which is prevalent. You have the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. You have the aspect where Europe is very antagonistic to countries such as Russia, China, and so on. So there are various geopolitical tensions due to which fuel prices, commodity prices, food prices, all of them are increasing. Whenever there is a high amount of inflation, it is the poorest which get hit hard. And India as a country which has got a lot of poor population, we need to be particularly mindful not to have that impact fall on our citizens. So global geopolitical uncertainty and commodity prices being unpredictable is a major challenge that the Indian economy faces going ahead. Then after that, a continued influx of capital expenditure by the government. So here, we have to understand that till now, since the time of the COVID pandemic, Indian government or the central government has been pumping in huge sums and huge amount of money in order to keep the economy running by building highways, infrastructure projects, various construction projects, so that more and more people find some meaningful employment. And why is it that the government did that? Because the private sector did not have money and the private sector was not investing. Now, the Indian government or the central government continues or needs to continue to pump in more money by the way of public expenditure, by the way of creating this infrastructure going ahead into the future as well, so that there's a continued growth in manufacturing, in electricity generation, a growth in employment which is generated, and overall demand in the economy which augurs well for it. Then, a controlled revenue expenditure needs to be ensured during the election year. We are going to have the general elections or the Lok Sabha elections next year. So thereby we need to ensure that, and that has always been a kind of a trend, that whenever the elections come in front of us, the governments, they start spending more, they start giving more amount of, in a way, freebies, they start giving more amount of money in the hands of the common public so that they get elected back to power. So that is a temptation that the government has to ward off, because once that happens, the revenue expenditure will go up. And the going up of revenue expenditure is never good for the growth of the economy. Right? Revenue expenditure is the amount of money that you spend without creating an asset. So the money that you spend in maybe pensions, in maybe the expenditures which are, let's say, carried out on a day-to-day basis in the form of wages, etc. So that needs to be controlled. And capital expenditure in terms of asset creation, more ports, more harbors, more airports, more highways, more railways, that needs to be ensured. Okay, so if that is done, then we can basically think about Indian economy following that growth trajectory in the coming years as well. Okay, so that is the crux of this entire article. If you go through this article has thrown a lot of numbers in front of you. It is not important for you to focus on these numbers. It is important for you to catch few of the cruxes out of it. For example, what do we mean by I-core? For example, what is it that Indian economy can take out from it or extract out of it going ahead into the future? That is something you need to focus upon. Okay? Now, then the other question or the other topic that we are going to discuss is, why do landfills catch fire during summers? So this is again going to be relevant and important for your paper 3. Okay? Now, why is it that this topic is in discussion? First of all, what do we understand or what do we mean when you talk about landfill? In simple terms, it is the area where we in general, we dump the garbage, and landfill in literal terms refers to a kind of an area. For example, let's suppose this is the land in general. So if you want to dispose of your garbage, so what is done in the various municipalities is, first of all, that area is slightly dug out. And on top of that, you pile up the garbage. So the garbage piles, that is something which is accumulated in these landfills. It is a manner of, or it is a matter of waste disposal system, so to say. Almost all the cities of our country, we have the landfills. And in almost all the outer portions of these cities, be it Delhi, be it Mumbai, be it Bangalore, be it Chennai, Kolkata, everywhere you will find these landfills. Now these landfills, they frequently catch fire, as has been the case recently, which was observed in the city of Kochi, right? And there you had the Brahmapuram landfill which caught fire. And due to that fire, the entire region was converted into a kind of a gas chamber where a lot of poisonous gases and a lot of significantly harmful gases, they were released into the atmosphere. And that does not bode well for human health or for climate change or global warming, any which way that you consider it. Now here, you have to understand that why is it that landfills, they catch fire? There must be some reason. So basically, in these landfills, what do you have? You have the municipal solid waste, isn't it? You have the presence of MSW or municipal solid waste. Now this municipal solid waste can broadly be classified into two types. It can be classified into biodegradable and also non-biodegradable. Biodegradable means the food items, for suppose, or leaves, twigs of branches, trees, etc. They can carry out decomposition on their own, right? With the help of microbes, they will get decomposed over a period of time. Non-biodegradable means, for example, plastics, right? They cannot be degraded. So that is composed of in municipal solid waste. Now, whenever these biodegradable waste, they are mixed with the aspect of non-biodegradable waste such as plastics, low-grade plastics, etc., oftentimes you will find that it catches fire. And that is because this biodegradation releases a lot of gases, gases which are poisonous, gases which are highly flammable. Flammable means which catches fire very easily. So gases such as methane, CH4 or methane, are released during the process of this decomposition or during this process of degradation as well. So here basically you will observe that in the entire process of biodegradation, all the waste, the organic waste, in the presence of moisture, in the presence of air, in the presence of certain microbes which you naturally find in the environment, they get converted into a kind of a manure, they get converted into a kind of a compost system. And in the entire process, they produce a lot of heat. Significant amount of heat is produced. Now, in that heat, high amount of heat, you have certain materials, certain particles such as low-grade plastics, cloth pieces, rags, etc., dried leaves. Now, at that heat, they catch fire immediately. Now here you might have a curiosity that when we say heat is produced, how much heat is produced? Or what is the quantum of heat produced? So basically the heat produced in these heaps is so high that in many of these areas, the temperature which is reached is close to around 70 to 80 degrees Celsius. Imagine, that much is the temperature which is achieved in these wastes because of that degradation. And that is when, in the presence of gases like methane and in the presence of lower grade plastics, rags, clothes, etc., that is when they catch fire. And when they catch fire, they will burn almost anything and everything in the way. They will keep on burning, and that is what releases a lot of pollution into the atmosphere. So the problem, why this is happening or why we are experiencing this, is very simple. That when we talk about India's municipalities, our municipalities have been collecting more than 95% of the waste generated in the cities. Even though we are able to collect that waste, we are unable to treat that waste. And by treating that waste, we mean dividing the portion into a kind of biodegradable, non-biodegradable, treating the biodegradable portion separately, the non-biodegradable portion separately. That is what is meant by it. And municipal solid waste, that consists of around 60% of biodegradable material, 25% which is non-biodegradable, and 15% which is inert. By inert, what do we mean? That they don't react. For example, silt, stone, concrete, iron pieces, etc. They don't react in order to produce fire and so on. It is this combination of 60 and 25% which creates all this havoc. So what needs to be done? What is it that we can do? One thing which many countries in the world they have adopted is that wherever you have the landfills, let's suppose here you have a landfill and this is the waste. On top of it, you cover it with a thin layering of soil. This is something which has been done in Bhopal as well, where Bhopal Municipal Corporation, in many of these landfill sites, they have covered it up by soil, converted it into a kind of a garden as well. But then, basically when you cover that with soil, that region becomes unutilizable for waste disposal, for waste utilization as well. So that is not the solution that we can think about. So basically, what is it we can do? We can go for waste segregation, where we segregate the biodegradable waste, non-biodegradable waste. The waste segregation into biodegradable and non-biodegradable, how will it help us? For example, when we talk about biodegradable waste, let's suppose we talk about biodegradable, that biodegradable waste after it is decomposed can be used as manures. Okay? Whereas the non-biodegradable waste that we talk about, that is something which can then maybe burnt under controlled oxygen conditions or pyrolysis, and thereby they can be reduced into some or the other form of charcoal, which can be utilized in various industries as a source of energy. For example, in brick kilns, for example, in cement plants, etc. So non-biodegradable can be converted into a kind of a source of fuel. That is something which is adopted in various different success stories of the world, such as Hong Kong, such as Singapore. Most of them, they deploy this mechanism where they make use of almost each and every part of the waste. And waste to energy generation is a significant portion of the circular economy as well. Now, regulating or regular upturning of the waste to lower the temperature. What does this mean? Now, when a waste is kept in a place, due to the reaction and decomposition which keeps on happening, the temperature keeps on rising. So upturning the waste on a regular basis ensures that there is penetration of air and that heat is lost on a regular basis, so that that excessive temperature of 70 or 80 degrees Celsius, that is not achieved. And there is a limitation to it. Then watering the waste without causing leaching. So on a regular basis, in order to ensure that there is no fire incident, provide some amount of water or sprinkle some amount of water on that waste, so that again that provides a kind of a cooling mechanism which is involved. That is also something which is significantly beneficial. And then you can have flammable materials like dried grass, dried trees, twigs or branches oftentimes that we throw, all that needs to be separated immediately because they act as fuel for the fire. They immediately will burn and they will lead to the spread of the fire in a vicious manner as well. So we can carry out these proper measures or corrective measures. And please understand, presently we are suffering or we are experiencing a kind of a heat wave condition in India. This is going to worsen in the coming months. So in the coming months, we can expect the news stories to come our way with regards to fire incidents which have emerged or erupted in the region of, let's say, Delhi or any other municipal areas or major metropolitan cities. So in order to prevent that, we need to ensure that these corrective measures are taken. Okay? Now, then we come to a couple of topics with regards to prelims. So here we will be talking about the aspect of Australia deciding to buy the US nuclear submarines under AUKUS. So this nuclear submarine that India or that Australia is buying, that is basically a kind of a strategy in order to strengthen the region in terms of the Indo-Pacific area with respect to the United States, UK and Australia forming that treaty. So for prelims, it is relevant for you to know what this AUKUS is. So it is basically a grouping of UK, US and Australia where they have come together to ensure provision of stealthy nuclear submarines to Australia in order to protect themselves, in order to carry out the defense purposes, and in order to check the growing hegemony of China in that particular region. So that is where AUKUS will be relevant for you for the examination. Then there has been a testing of Indigenous very short range missile system. So they are also referred to as BYJU'S. So these are basically BYJU'S or very short range air defense systems. Now this has been developed by DRDO, and that is where this has been tested significantly since last year itself. Since the month of September onwards, this test has been carried out quite frequently. This is where now the test has been carried out repeatedly, and that had ensured a kind of a success. Now what this BYJU'S is, that in a very short environment, in a very short reaction period of time, that is where these missiles can be fired, and when these missiles are fired, they can hit the incoming UAVs or incoming aircrafts, and these can be a kind of a defense of last resort. So they don't have a large range. They have a range of around only 250 meters to at max around 6 to 7 kilometers, not more than that. But then they significantly help you to protect major military installations, major important buildings, important cities. Now it is not as if this is the only protective system that you will have. The entire missile shield that has got multiple layers. You will have missile systems which will protect targets which are coming towards you even from a distance of 200 to 400 kilometers. That is why we have procured the S-400 system from Russia as well. So this is the last phase or the last leg of that entire protective shield which needs to be developed. So that is something which you need to know. Again, for your prelims, BYJU'S can always be asked in the prelims paper. So that is all that we are going to discuss for today. So now the questions, the couple of questions which you can basically try to write if you want. So discuss the reasons for the frequent fires observed in landfills in India. Why there are such frequent fires which happen? Climatic conditions, the mixing of biodegradable, non-biodegradable waste, presence of flammable gases such as methane which is produced, presence of very quick fire catching commodities such as rags, plastics, low-grade plastics, clothes, dried leaves, etc. All that you can write. Elaborate upon the preventive measures which can be taken. Segregation of waste, bioremediation, pyrolysis, incineration, all those factors you can write. Okay? Now, then, the Saudi-Iranian deal marks a tectonic change in global power equations. Now, elaborate upon the statement and discuss the learnings for India in the process. So in the introduction of this, you talk about how China has brokered a deal in between these two countries, which have traditionally not been the best of the friends, and thereby, after that, you can start elaborating upon the fact that why China has stepped in, why it is important for generating peace in the region, why it is important for energy security in the entire world, why is it that China has replaced United States, and also what lies ahead for India going ahead. Okay, so that is how you can write the answer for it. Try to write it, practice it, and after this, I would encourage you, I would advise you to go to our channel on Telegram, try the multiple choice questions from the topic, and assess how well you have understood, or if at all you have understood anything from this topic. So the link for that will be given in the description below. That will be all from our side. If you like the video, please click on the like, share, and subscribe. And that will be all from our side. Thank you and goodbye.